What's up, world? Very happy Wednesday to you all. And it's Wednesday again, so it's time to put in the unseen work. And tonight, we are joined by the one and only Mr. Tom Reddy of Synergy Steel. He is the Director of Business Development for Synergy Steel. Unseen work of me processing words. The Business Development Director of Synergy Steel. It's a tongue twister, but that's part of the fun of live broadcast. We're excited to have Tom. We're going to break down the unseen work of sales. It could be a 4-letter word for a lot of you people, especially watching tonight on LinkedIn. If you're either directly in a sales role or you work at all with a sales team, you understand that there's a lot of different moving parts and pieces before that contract is signed. And we will unpack all of that with Tom, as well as Tom's own story, which includes some interesting milestones from football career, a movie appearance. He was sharing all sorts of fun stuff with me that we'll get all of his perspective on. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Tom Reddy.
Hey.
Tom, have you ever gotten tripped up on saying Synergy Steel before, or is it just me?
Oh no, that is a bit of a tongue twister, and we use it to our advantage. Obviously, you know when you're out there handling a lot of different adversity and diversity, you need to be able to bounce off those things and make them work to your advantage.
Hey, we're already joined by a fellow Southerner, Tom. Got Marcello here from Atlanta. Thanks for watching.
Fantastic.
Hopefully it's not as cold as it is in Atlanta as it is for you in South Carolina, like you were saying earlier. Somebody deserves to be warm, right?
Yeah, I'll give it to the Atlanta guys. We got some work going on down there. We want to keep those guys warm.
So let's start with this, right? Just give us broad strokes so people have an understanding of the conversation we're about to have around your current role, in addition to how you got there. So what does it mean for you to be the Director of Business Development for Synergy Steel? What's a typical day like? What does Synergy Steel do? Give us some of that context,
Sure.
please.
Well, I'll start with what we do. Synergy Steel provides a panelized wall system, floor cassettes, and roof trusses to the commercial and residential building industry. And with that said, comes a lot of different complexities. There's a lot of different details on steel and tensile strength and gauges and galvanization and all that stuff. There's a lot of pieces on how you assemble that steel, put it together to match engineering capabilities and requirements for structural integrity and so forth. And then there's also that whole installation piece that takes that piece of steel or that panel and takes it out to a job site and starts erecting a building with it. So many different complexities there. And what I do for Synergy Steel is I'm involved in the business development side. So on a daily basis, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find those guys out there, those contractors, developers, owners, architects, engineering firms who are involved in building buildings, both from commercial and residential. And I try to take our product to them and show them how it's the greatest value in the industry right now. And in this volatile industry, everybody's talking about lumber and the lumber prices and availability and steel and some of the increases that we're getting hit with from a steel perspective. It's an interesting I'll say game, and I say game because that goes back to some of my past and playing ball and you really have to be able to understand the details of your trade. You need to be able to stay up on as much of the most current information and the most current activities that are taking place in your market segment, so that you're able to add a value to that potential customer, that prospect's life. Because a lot of times it's a really big thing in their company that we want to be able to contribute to and be able to help them progress with, both from a building standpoint and also from a relationship standpoint, and being able to come together and work together and walk away shaking hands and saying, hey, we had a great, we had a great activity. We had a great involvement. We had a great end result, and the customers are happy with it. So I got the greatest job in the world because I get to go out and talk to people. I get to bring this great product to them, and I get to really understand what it is they're faced with day in and day out so that I can help resolve some of those issues.
Yeah, like you said, you got to be the expert, right? Whether they're buying steel from you or, widget XYZ, they're also buying you, right? And that relationship with you, access to you and your knowledge, regardless of what the product it is you're selling.
Right. And people buy relationships. There's always going to be a similar or better product. Just like playing football, for example, there's always going to be somebody bigger, stronger, faster, better than you. It's just how you use the techniques that you have and your abilities to develop relationships in the sales perspective, or your ability to use your leverages and your skill sets in an athletic event. It's all how well you can use those tools. And part of driving home sales or understanding the buying cycle that people go through, understanding that to the best of your ability is where you want to play. That's where you get the accolades, the name, the continued relationships, and as word of mouth gets out there, you start to pick up more and more warm discussions versus cold calls or cold discussions.
So you mentioned football. You're an athlete. I was a competitive swimmer all through college.
That's a tough sport.
I find that, like, for me, a big part of my unseen work, I didn't realize it in the time, right? I would call this passive unseen work, where I look back and had no idea it would have such a bearing on other things I'm working on. But just the mental fortitude that I gained from pushing myself physically in swimming. And in swimming, when your head's literally just underwater, so you just have a lot of thinking to do. And it's that whole, like, when you're like telling yourself it's okay to stop, and then the other voice comes in and says, you better not stop. And you're just like battling with yourself and pushing through all that. But now today, I've like harnessed that mental muscle, and I sort of love that extra challenge of trying to get 1 second faster, right, in my career instead of the pool now. And how do I push myself, and what technique can I tweak and things like that? So hearing you talk about it, I'm going to assume the answer is yes, but I'd love some more context around your answer to this question, is how you feel sports, being an athlete in your youth, was a piece of unseen work to prepare you for a career in sales.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it all goes back to having that drive to constantly challenge yourself, as you mentioned, from a swimmer's perspective, but having that drive to always be setting that goal in front of you, and once you meet it, have that perseverance or that push to say, okay, I'm going to set the bar a little higher now, and then force yourself to hit that goal. And I think that's what a lot of this comes back to, is being able to identify those goals and those necessary steps that you need to force yourself to work through. For me, I did not like running distances. I would go to the field and I'd run sprints all day long, short sprints all day long. But you tell me to go run a mile, boy, I didn't like that. So that was like one of those things back in the day that I really had to force myself to go and do, because I knew I needed it. I needed that cardiovascular, but I really didn't like what I had to do to get it and how I had to get it. So I think first and foremost, it's having that ability to take a look at more of an active, unseen activity to set the goal to get you from A to B, and be able to plug in those steps or those milestones along the way to help you reach that. And really, those are the things that nobody sees. They don't see you at 9 o'clock at night at a field by yourself when it's dark, running miles. or sprints or in a swimming pool, at 4 a.m, because that's when you get pool time, forcing yourself to swim however far you're going to swim. So, I think that's the first step. I, I think that's the first step. And I think after that, it starts to, as you move down that path, and you start to see yourself being able to hit multiple levels. I think that starts to really drive the motivation to want to challenge yourself again and again. And that's critically important too, because if you struggle to see those successes, the motivation's going to eventually start to diminish, and you don't want to have that happen. So as long as you can, in that sort of active, unseen work, have those milestones to get you from point A to point B to point C, they're real important. And then being able to work your passive unseen work where it's more of a gray area, and you're able to see some of the fallout and some of the maybe more creative activities that you need to do to help reach those milestones. I think those two blended together. It's why I'm really intrigued with your TED Talk and the way you break this down, this workload down. It really helps solidify and maybe clarify for myself and maybe others, how those pieces all play together. And it's really an exciting endeavor when you really sit back and walk yourself through that.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear you say that. I mean, it certainly was for me when I was kind of workshopping that idea, and then had my own sort of moments where I was like, oh, wait, here's my personal example of this, swimming being one of them, right? So where did you start in sales? Football was a driver and things like that, right? And now you're a director of business development. You're not just an entry-level salesperson. But how'd you go from football into a sales gig? Like, what was the first thing you sold where you realized you had a knack for it? I'd love to hear the beginnings of Tom Reddy, sales extraordinaire.
Well, I'll start with one day I got sort of smacked in the forehead with a brick when a football coach told me, son, it's time to get on with your life's work, and that's not playing football. So that was sort of the aha moment that said, okay, I better go find something else to do. And but really, what we did was, there was a group of us that were involved in a startup company that was, back in the day, was considered a management consulting firm, and I happened to be the one who sort of stepped back and was probably the youngest of the group, and was always questioning, where's our next piece of business going to come from? Okay, we have a nice project. We're all doing the things we do day in and day out to run a project. Where's the next one coming from? I'd always be the one asking that question, and I think because I was young and naive, it kind of like put me into that role that said, okay, we don't know, but you're asking the question, so you go figure it out. So it kind of just was bestowed upon me to be the one to go try to figure out where the next piece of business was coming from. So I did a lot of research at the time, and I don't want to date myself, but back in that time, there wasn't a whole lot of information on the internet. But so I went searching around, and I found some books, and I found some self-help tapes and things like that, and I really started working down a path of solution selling, identifying a need or a pain or a concern that a company might have, and coming up with what are the solutions to solve those issues or those pains or those problems that the organization has, and identifying which of those solutions fit the company that I'm working for's strengths and skill sets. So before I could get to that point, I need to step back and pull these directors and these owners and so forth into a room and say, okay, what's our mission? What's our vision? What's the values of this company? Where do we want to go? How do we want to build it? What's our geographic area we want to play in? Who are the target markets that we want to go after? Where do we have the most successes that we can just start repeating those successes? And once we identified some of those key pieces, and to get to identifying those key pieces, there's a lot of that background information that needs to play into supporting that information. So we get this vision of where the company wants to go and what it wants to be. And now we can start to take a look at, okay, how do we roll that into getting people excited about talking to us? Because I started out down a telephone, and I put a sign on the phone, and it said, "Pick me up, I'll make you money." And that's the motivation I needed every day. So every day I walked in and looked at that sign that was on my phone. It was like, looks like that thing's going to make me money. So I'd pick up the phone, I'd start dialing. So that's where I got my start in sales. Is I really was sort of pushed into it. And, we started doing some of the behind the scenes work of identifying the strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats in the industry and so forth, and from our competitors. And we went after some target markets. We started generating leads. We started developing those leads we generated. And then we moved into, how do we take what we're doing and parlay it into new market penetrations? And to hit those three main areas, there's a lot of background information and a background unseen work that needs to be done. You need to, at the time, we use the internet. Back then we were using Dun and Bradstreet discs, where we were searching for specific type companies with certain sizes, certain revenues, certain vertical markets that they were working in. And we were really identifying which ones we wanted to go after. And then, and only then, start to try to work on breaking through into some of the key decision makers and getting on their schedule. And my ratios that I always throw out there at the time was, you got to dial 100 different numbers to get 10 contacts to get 4 meetings. So it's like a 10%, a 10%, and a 4% or 40%. So it's not a high ratio. You got to dial the phone 100 different times to get 4 guys to meet with you. And so you better be ready when you see those 4 guys. And that takes a whole nother set of unseen activities that got to take place to prepare you for that. Once we start identifying like who we want to go visit, and this is fast forward to current day, couple of the key questions that I always have our guys ask, or at least get a solid understanding of, are 2 main questions. 1, are you talking to a viable business? And 2, do they have money to spend on what you're trying to sell them? And if you say, if either one of those questions answers come back as a no, it's probably not worth your time to try to get that guy to be a customer. Are they a viable business, and do they have the money to spend on what you're trying to sell them? If it's no on those 2, there's many others out there you should be spending your time on. If they're yes, now you have something that you can start to work on, start to work to, and really start to generate some excitement.
So when you dial on the phone 100 times to get, all the way down to get 4 people to meet with you, that's a lot of no's before you hear yeses. And we hear that all the time when people talk about sales, right? You have to be ready to hear no. But talking about it and actually hearing no 90 times before you hear yes, right? Getting hung up on, probably getting cursed out. I'm sure you've heard a whole bunch on the other end of that phone.
Absolutely.
What is something you learned the hard way, or maybe you didn't expect? Like, it was unseen to you within sales until you were right in the middle of it.
I think one of the
thinker question. Had to grab some water.
Yeah.
I like it.
I think one of the moments that I figured out how to work your flip analogy, where I was doing where I got to the pivot position and started to pivot, was when I realized that you're trying to get to a decision maker and you're trying to get a meeting with a decision maker, because that's the guy that's going to make the decision on whether or not your product or service or whatever you're trying to sell is something that's viable for them to buy. But what I realized was I was going about trying to get to those people the wrong way. I was constantly trying to get that guy on the phone and, hit him with my 5-second speech that says, I'm the greatest, you need to meet with me, kind of a thing. I realized that it's the other people around him that would do that for me if I could spend a little bit of time with them. So the hard lesson that I learned was I've been wasting a lot of time, a lot of effort, ponding this phone, trying to get to this Mr. Big or Mrs. Big decision maker, when if I worked some of those lieutenants to them or some of the lower level guys to those big decision makers.
Yeah, the gatekeepers. Yeah.
Right. A lot of times that person just making a simple comment that, hey, this guy sounds like a pretty good guy on the phone, all of a sudden gets me in the door and gets a warm welcome versus a cold kind of person sitting back with their arms crossed, giving you the body language that says, okay, I'll give you 5 minutes and I'll get out of here and don't ever come back and quit calling me. So that was my big, I think that was one of the big things that I learned, that I had to do a flip and not a flop, to really get to the right level of people and really start to work with people. It really opened my eyes to understand and realize that everybody that you meet in any organization is a valuable asset for you to have the opportunity to meet. I look at it as the more people I can meet and the more discussions I can have, the more evidence and sort of armor that I can build to eventually get that company as a customer.
I keep thinking about what you said about putting a sign on your phone that said, "Pick me up, I'll make you money." I love that. And I'm curious, so you tell us, the world that now, but I'm sure at the time nobody saw that. That's a little, unseen piece of a Tom there. I'm curious what else, what are some things you had to do for yourself to keep yourself motivated, to keep coming up, being told no, getting the door closed, whatever.
Yeah.
So you had a note that said, "Pick me up, I'll make you money." What other little tricks or things did you have to do to pump yourself up that nobody saw?
Yeah, there's another one that I really keep in mind, and it rings every day. And it's if you want to be the 1%, you got to do what the 99% won't do. And that's basically what it comes down to, is you got to put the grind in. I talk to my kids all the time, and I tell them, get up, go to work, grind it out, because eventually that'll turn into something that you're really excited about, and that you'll have that self gratification that you drove yourself to. It's putting in the grind. And when I was coaching midget football, I did the same thing with that crew. We were blessed. We were blessed. We had a great group of kids, and very, very talented group of kids. So we were the team in the area that everybody was trying to get a win against, and we never seemed to be able to give up and lose to anyone. So that's a really hard thing to keep a group of people motivated to come to practice every day and to put forth effort that's going to make them better. So to motivate them, it was all about self-motivation versus getting a end result that's a win on a Saturday or a Sunday. So I always talked about every minute of every day on the practice field. You need to make sure that you're getting the most out of every minute that you can. That if you let a minute go by, then you've lost something. You've come up short. There's going to be someone else out there that's taking advantage of that minute you missed. And don't ever let that happen. And what we really would say at the end of every game, I mean, there were games where we had some pretty high scores, but every time at the end of the game, my game ending speech, I talked to them. I said, did any of you make it through this past game doing the right thing 100% of the time, to doing 100% of the work 100% of the time? And none of them could say yes to any game. So I said, then what that means is we got a little more work to do. We got to work. Come practice next week. We got to work because we're pushing to get to that position where we do 100% of the things right 100% of the time. And that's another one of the things I use is if you want to be in that 1%, you got to do what 99% of the other 99% don't want to do.
I love that. So how is coaching now? Going back to sports, you were an athlete. Now you're coaching. How do you find coaching kids in sports spills over into your professional life in coaching salespeople?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's a lot of different analogies, and there's much greater coaches and much better salespeople than I that have talked a lot about this team development, teamwork, camaraderie, being part of an organization that's setting goals and pushing each other to the next level. Whether you're in a sport where you got a team around you and you're depending on people around you to do their job to get to an end result, or you're in a sport where you're the focal point for the minute and a half that you're in the limelight, and your teammates are cheering you on and really driving you to be successful in that minute and a half of time that you're operating, whichever it is. I think having that having those goals and going back to the active unseen activities, having those goals in front of you and really teaching everybody what those goals are and what their piece of reaching those goals is and how their skill sets match that piece. It's really important for me from a sales perspective to understand each individual and their skill sets. So, I put this little chart together that has all these different skill sets at the top and people's names down the bottom, and I grade them A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, whatever. But it gives you a very good understanding that if me as a manager, if we're going into a situation where I need somebody that has great communication skills and I need somebody that has great recall of what's going on in a meeting, then I can go to that skill set chart and I can find the two that are the best at those, and I can make them part of the team that's going into that meeting because that's what I need in that setting. So, one, identifying what those skill sets are that are needed, and two, identifying the individuals and where they play. It doesn't mean any of them are better than each other. It means that we understand where you're going to excel and it's all about finding the
Right.
strengths of those people to help the overall organization excel. It's not anything about finding the weaknesses and saying, okay, that's a weakness. That person has too many weaknesses, so let's exclude them. It's more of finding those strengths and putting those teams together to drive the strengths. On the weakness side, we can work on
Yeah, it's
making
like,
them better.
you gotta have a quarterback and a running back, right? Not everybody can play the same position. So you find what people are good at, and then you put a play on the field.
Correct. That's exactly it. And that's how I use a lot of that old coaching methodology, and I bring it into the workplace in today's environment.
So you mentioned flip and flop a few times, which I got to say, Tom, you're quoting me to me, which makes me smile. It's fun for me to hear you using my terms in conversation. But I want to go there and talk about some failures because I love talking about failure. I think it's not talked about enough. People try to shy away from it. As you know, in sales, you've got to make those mistakes and fail to learn from it and get better.
Hey,
So
I make them
love to
every day.
focus on a
I
flop.
made them this week. I made mistakes this week, but go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I mean, geez, I started off this interview with one, right? I couldn't even get the name of your company out of my mouth, right? It's okay. But so what about a flop? We've talked about how you're taking things and using them for good and positivity, but the flop is the fail, lie, obsess, pretend. Has there been a moment for you where you're literally flopped face down and it's done? True failure. It didn't work out. You weren't able to flip it into learning.
No, that never happened to me. No, not at all. No, I'm kidding.
You give 100% of the time?
I'm kidding. No, there's been many of those moments where you look back and you just say, "Man, I blew that one." There's times where I've gone into meetings, or I've gone several steps down a sales process, and decided that, yeah, you know what, I got these other 4 or 5 over here. I'm going to go pay attention to them and kind of let that prospect sort of die on the vine, and find out later that it was a big client for one of our competitors. That's reality, because that hits you with oh man, why did you go to one of my competitors? Well, you disappeared on me, or you made me feel like I wasn't important to you anymore. Those
Sure.
kind of things start to surface, and you're like, man, I got to start paying more attention to the people that I start this with. I got to make sure I stay more attentive to their needs as we go through this process. So that's happened on more occasions than I want to talk about, or that I want to think about, I should say, let alone talk about. But yeah, that is a learning experience, though. And each of the times that it's happened, I think I've learned something new about what I should have done. I should have checked on making sure they checked my references before I took them to the next step, or I should have got them involved with other people in my organization, because it's not all about me. The relationship between the individuals is okay, but when you can bring a team in, and all of a sudden that credibility of the company grows to another level, because it's not just me, it's multiple people that make up this organization, and our credibility just grows in leaps and bounds when you have that opportunity. So, yeah, I've had some flops from that perspective. I mean, I've had flops where maybe I didn't train hard enough, maybe I didn't take myself serious enough, maybe I could have ran an extra mile, and it could have put me in a better position or taken me another day or a week or a month down the line of play in sports. So yeah, there's times where I look back at those kind of things and wonder. You mentioned early on, I had a stint in a movie. I think a flop in my life back then was I didn't pursue it beyond. I mean, I was lucky that some casting director found me working in a health club and decided I was the person that they're looking for this movie to fit this role in this movie. Never had any training, never really was wanting or needing to be in a movie. Um, but I think the flop part of that is I did very well at it, but I didn't pursue it. And like years later, you look back and you're just kicking yourself and you're saying, man, why didn't I try that? Why didn't I just put a little more effort forward? But then you look at it and you say, okay, I'm not going to let that happen again. I'm gonna explore every opportunity I can to its fullest, and then if it works out, great. And I don't want to get religious on us, but man, I believe God's got it, and He's got the pen, and He's writing the script for you. As long as you ride His script, everything's going to be fine.
Yeah, and show up for every minute, right? I love that you said it. It reminds me of something that was talked about in swimming all the time too, is that it doesn't matter how fast you were, today or yesterday, somebody can always be outworking you in the pool and it will be faster next time. You have to keep earning that, showing up for every minute, putting one foot forward and to be there, to be present for God's plan, whatever it is, right? You have to show up in order to enact whatever the plan is. You can't.
That's correct.
He can't work for you if he doesn't know where to find you, right? So
that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
What's something that's unseen about sales and business development that you wish more people saw and understood?
I wish people would be able to see and understand the depths of information that great salespeople go to educate themselves on being able to sharpen their trade or their skills in their trade. I think that's something that people just don't understand. People that aren't involved in it and into the depths of it don't understand how important and how detailed that education has to be for you to be able to sit across from somebody and help them resolve issues in their business, whether that be by taking the product that you're trying to sell them or the service you're bringing to them, being able to bring that and communicate and have that one-on-one credibility built takes a lot of education, self-education, self-drive, self-determination to be really good and understand that guy's business as well as he does when you're a stranger, walking into his office.
Right.
That's
the part. You only get one shot. They start to test your knowledge and want to know if you know your stuff, and you don't, then they're not going to want to talk to you. So you have to, like you said, know more than them almost.
Right. Your credibility will dip really quick whenever you don't have responses, answers, and a lot of them want that information, as we all do, especially with cell phones, internet, all that. You want those answers spontaneous. I mean, it has to happen now. You need to have that type of reaction. Has to be quick, and it's not something that you can say, well, you know what, I'll get back to you next week on that. It's part of the conversation. It's part of that whole relationship build, and the amount of work you got to put in to put you in that type of a position is something that I don't think everybody realizes and understands. But it would be nice for them to understand that.
Sure. Someone acknowledge it, right? Like, hey, look at me over here. I'm busting my butt before I even see you. And you right think here. I'm starting to work. I've already been working. That's awesome.
All right.
Well, Tom, I've enjoyed this conversation. I really appreciate your time tonight. It's been fun. This is the first time you and I have talked. We've just interacted in comments,
Right.
on the Dave Cooper ecosystem. So shout out to Dave. It's where I first was introduced to you in Synergy Steel. I appreciate you hopping on to Unseen Work, and it was fun getting to hear your story. And I think a lot of people took some good nuggets picking up the phone because it makes you money. That's what I'm walking away with.
I hope so. I hope they enjoyed it. I hope I was able to contribute to some of the things that people are dealing with in their lives today. I appreciate you inviting me on, and everything that you guys are doing for the industry. I really enjoy the Thursday shows with Dave Cooper and his live team, and your show there. And really, I didn't know too much about this program on Wednesday evenings, but I can tell you over the last month or so, I've really enjoyed them and enjoyed a lot of the characters that you have had on.
Thank you. Yeah, we got plenty more coming up. It's a good segue
That's
into
good.
next week, everybody. The 19th of May already. Jeez. We'll be joined by Mr. Nick Mann of Typo Prints, joining us from Washington State. And if you see over my shoulder here, I'm always bad at the mirror. Here we go. This way. This one. My own quote on my wall. People kind of joke with me. Is that your name on your own wall? What are you doing? But the answer is yes. And Nick is the guy that designed that. He put a collection together based on Unseen Work after my book came out and TED Talk came out. So it's going to be really cool to talk to him about what he's doing with motivational prints and building up his own business in graphic design. So tune in wherever you're watching this or listening to this right now. The next episode will feature Mr. Nick Mann. And I'll be here as well. Thank you for joining me this week, and I will see you next week.